Let me tell you about a patient that I still think about. He was 44 years old, lean, athletic build. He'd been running half marathons for 6 years, trained 5 days a week without fail, non-smoker. I barely drank. Ate what most people would consider an excellent diet, mostly whole foods, high protein, vegetables with every meal. He had no family history of heart disease that he was aware of. His resting heart rate was 52. He looked, from the outside, like someone who had done everything right. He came into my emergency department with chest tightness during a morning run. We did an ECG. We ran his troponin levels. And what we found confirmed something that, after 13 years in emergency medicine, I have stopped being surprised by, but have never stopped taking seriously. He had significant coronary artery disease, partially blocked vessels feeding his heart, the kind of blockage we typically associate with sedentary, overweight, middle-aged patients who have spent decades eating poorly and avoiding exercise. Not with someone who looked like him. When I told him, his first response wasn't fear, it was disbelief. He said, and I have heard versions of this sentence more times than I can count, "I thought people like me didn't get this." That sentence is the reason I'm making this video. Because the belief behind it that fitness protects you from heart disease is one of the most dangerous half-truths in modern medicine. And the gap between what people believe about cardiovascular health and what is actually happening inside their arteries is costing lives, including the lives of people who are, by every conventional measure, taking extraordinarily good care of themselves. Hi, my name is Dr. Miles. I'm an emergency medicine physician with 13 years of frontline experience. I've worked at the sharp end of cardiovascular emergencies for over a decade, and what I want to do in this video is explain something that the standard health conversation almost never addresses. Why fit, active, health-conscious people still develop serious heart disease? What is actually driving it? And why the metrics most people use to measure their cardiovascular health, their weight, their fitness level, their cholesterol number, are telling them an incomplete and sometimes dangerously misleading story. What heart disease actually is. Before we can understand why fit people get it, we need to be precise about what heart disease actually is at the biological level. Because most people have a vague picture of it that doesn't match the reality. Coronary artery disease, the most common form of heart disease and the leading cause of heart attacks, is not simply a plumbing problem caused by fat sticking to artery walls. That is the old model, and it is wrong in ways that matter enormously. What coronary artery disease actually is an inflammatory disease of the arterial wall. It begins not with fat deposits, but with damage to the endothelium, that extraordinarily thin layer of cells lining the inside of every artery. When the endothelium is injured or chronically inflamed, it loses its protective function. It becomes sticky and permeable. LDL cholesterol particles, which are present in everyone's bloodstream, begin to penetrate the arterial wall and become trapped there. The immune system responds to those trapped particles as if they were a foreign invader. White blood cells rush in. Inflammation intensifies. Over time, a plaque forms inside the wall of the artery, not just on the surface of it. That plaque grows slowly, silently, and without any symptoms for years or even decades. And here's the critical point that changes everything. The plaques most likely to rupture and cause a heart attack are not necessarily the largest ones. They are the most inflamed ones. A relatively small plaque with a thin, unstable cap and a highly inflammatory core can rupture suddenly, trigger a clot, and block the artery completely. That is a heart attack. And it can happen in a 44-year-old man with a resting heart rate of 52 and 6 years of half-marathon training behind him. Fitness does not prevent this process. It can slow it. It can improve some of the contributing factors. But if the underlying inflammatory environment inside the arterial wall is wrong, if the conditions that drive endothelial damage and plaque formation are present, cardiovascular disease will develop regardless of how many miles someone runs per week. The drivers that fitness cannot cancel. This is where I want to spend the most time, because this is what most people have never been told clearly. There are specific biological drivers of coronary artery disease that physical fitness does not neutralize, and many of them are disproportionately common in people who are otherwise health conscious, because they are driven not by obvious lifestyle failures, but by hidden metabolic and hormonal patterns that standard health checks almost never measure. The first is chronic systemic inflammation. Inflammation is the engine of atherosclerosis. The endothelial damage that initiates plaque formation, the immune response that drives its growth, the instability that makes plaques dangerous, all of it is inflammation. And the sources of chronic low-grade inflammation in modern life are not limited to poor diet and inactivity. They include chronically disrupted sleep, which elevates inflammatory markers, including CRP and interleukin-6, even in otherwise healthy individuals. They include chronic psychological stress, which activates the immune system through cortisol dysregulation and sympathetic nervous system overactivation. They include excessive training load without adequate recovery, a pattern common in dedicated athletes, which generates repeated oxidative stress that the cardiovascular system cannot fully repair between sessions. A person can be genuinely fit and genuinely inflamed at the same time, and their fitness level provides no protection against the arterial damage that inflammation is quietly causing. The second driver is insulin resistance. And this is the one I see most consistently underappreciated. Insulin resistance does not announce itself. It does not show up in a standard cholesterol panel. It does not make you feel unwell in any obvious way in its early stages. But what it does, silently and persistently, is damage the endothelium. Chronically elevated insulin impairs nitric oxide production, the chemical signal that keeps arteries flexible and resistant to plaque formation. It raises triglycerides. It produces a specific pattern of small, dense LDL particles that are far more likely to penetrate the arterial wall than the larger, more buoyant LDL particles measured in a routine blood test. And it drives visceral fat accumulation even in people who look lean externally, which generates a continuous stream of inflammatory signals directed at the arterial wall. You can be running 5 days a week and simultaneously be insulin resistant if your eating pattern, your sleep, and your stress levels are creating the hormonal conditions for it. Exercise improves insulin sensitivity acutely, but it cannot fully override a diet that keeps insulin elevated for 14 hours a day, or a sleep pattern that chronically suppresses metabolic recovery, or a stress load that keeps cortisol elevated from morning to night. The third driver is something called lipoprotein A, written as LPA, and it is almost never discussed outside of specialist cardiology. LPA is a variant form of LDL cholesterol that is highly atherogenic, meaning it is particularly effective at driving plaque formation. Unlike regular LDL, LPA levels are determined almost entirely by genetics. Diet and exercise have virtually no effect on them. A person can have an optimal lifestyle in every measurable way and carry dangerously elevated LPA without knowing it, because it is not included in a standard lipid panel. It requires a specific, separate blood test. And in emergency medicine, I've seen patients whose heart attacks were driven primarily by LPA, who had no other conventional risk factors. Fit, non-smokers, normal cholesterol, normal blood pressure, and LPA levels that had been silently accelerating coronary artery disease for years. If this is giving you a framework for cardiovascular health that you haven't had before, please subscribe to this channel right now. I make these videos because what I see in emergency medicine tells me that the public conversation about heart health is leaving out the most important parts. Every subscriber helps this content reach someone who needs it. Hit the button and let's keep going. Why the metrics we trust are not enough. The standard cardiovascular health check measures total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, blood pressure, BMI, and resting heart rate. For a fit, lean, non-smoking person, these numbers will almost always look reassuring. And that reassurance is creating a dangerous blind spot. Total cholesterol and standard LDL tell you how much cholesterol is in your blood. They do not tell you whether your arterial wall is inflamed. They do not tell you your LPA. They do not measure your insulin sensitivity. They do not assess the quality and stability of existing plaques. They do not detect the early endothelial dysfunction that precedes visible disease by a decade or more. The metrics that actually predict cardiovascular events in fit? Apparently, healthy people include coronary artery, calcium scoring, a low-dose CT scan that directly visualizes calcium deposits in coronary arteries and provides the most powerful available predictor of future cardiovascular events. They include high-sensitivity CRP, which measures systemic inflammation. They include fasting insulin, which detects insulin resistance years before it shows in blood glucose, and they include LPA, measured once, because it does not change. None of these are part of a standard health check. All of them are available. And for someone who is fit and health conscious, and therefore believes they are protected, they are the tests most worth having. In 13 years of emergency medicine, the cases that have shaped my thinking most are not the predictable ones. They are athletes in their 40s, the marathon runners, the people who gave up smoking 20 years ago and have been cycling to work ever since, the patients who walk into the department or are brought in with a cardiac event that their entire lifestyle was supposed to prevent. What those cases have taught me is that cardiovascular disease is not a moral judgment on how someone has lived. It is a biological process driven by inflammation, hormonal environment, genetic factors, and the accumulated effect of conditions that standard health metrics were never designed to detect. Fitness is genuinely protective. Exercise is one of the most powerful cardiovascular interventions we have, but it is not a guarantee. And treating it as one, believing that because you train hard and eat well, you are insulated from serious heart disease, is a belief that emergency departments quietly disprove every single week. The question is not whether you are fit. The question is whether the inside of your arteries reflects the effort you are putting in on the outside. And until you measure the right things, you genuinely do not know the answer. Know your inflammation. Know your insulin. Know your LPA. Get your coronary calcium score if you are over 40. And consider yourself at low risk. Because the people most likely to be surprised by a serious cardiac event are the ones who were most certain it couldn't happen to them. If this video changed how you think about your own heart health, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who trains hard and assumes that training is enough. It reaches people who need it through you. Thank you for watching.